Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge program. The Fatherhood Challenge is a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability of an environment and culture. We're going to encourage and challenge each other to step up and do courageous things that make our families and communities better places. So let's get to it. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always great to have you with me. I appreciate each and every one of you joining in. My guest today is Bernie Anderson. He's a church engagement lead and senior church advisor at World Vision USA. Today, we are talking about a very, very powerful subject, and it's a topic that's very, very critical because we're talking about the number one thing that in this time, in this day and age, is destroying fathers and destroying families. And this is why it is so important for us to talk about this right now. So I appreciate Bernie being with us to talk about this subject. So, Bernie, before we get too far into this, what is your favorite dad joke? I'm just curious.
Well, yeah. Hey, it's very appropriate that as a dad, I should have a dad joke. So, how about this? What do you call a fish that wears a bow tie?
What's that?
Sophisticated. There you go.
I love it. I love it.
Awesome.
That's awesome. All right. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in because there is so much to talk about. So we're going to be talking specifically about fatherhood and pornography. Why are we even talking about this in the first place?
I think it's so important to have this conversation. I Being a father is so critical, right? And there's such influence that we have over our kids, and um especially when it comes to leading young boys, and not to take anything away from how we influence our daughters as well. I have three daughters, and so it's so important as a father that we recognize and we understand the level of influence we have over our children. And so it's absolutely appropriate that we talk about this, because I've also learned through this journey, which you're going to hear about in just a little bit, is that the cycle continues very often through a father's struggle with pornography. So whether it's a son or a daughter, very often it's a son, they pick up the habit or even the addiction of pornography, viewing, consuming, taking in pornography, often through their fathers. And so if we can break the cycle, we can stop this thing from spreading and impacting future generations, if we can get fathers to begin to address it in their own lives. And so the influence that fathers have is a primary reason, and then just to break the cycle, to stop this thing from spreading like the cancer that it is, from destroying relationships, and from influencing generations, from generation to generation, I think is absolutely the reason why we got to be talking about this.
Well, you have a really powerful testimony, and I have not heard all of it. So I am looking forward to hearing about it just as much as the audience is. But this is your testimony about how pornography became a part of your life and what you did to become free. How did you walk away from it? So, how did this all happen?
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, I stumbled across pornography. It was in a relative's home, even, and it was purely accidental. I wasn't looking for pornography. I didn't even know what pornography was. But I was 9 years old, and I stumbled across it in a relative's home. It was literally in a closet, in a box, right? And so I go in, and I was one of those kids that would go, rummaging around and exploring, didn't matter where. And I just happened upon this box. I started digging through the box, and lo and behold, here were the discarded pages of a pornographic magazine. And part of the magazine was actually still intact. So I sat there as a 9-year-old boy and began to thumb through and unfold those discarded pages of that magazine. And my world was opened, and my eyes were open, and my world was open to something altogether new, something that I had never known before, and it was captivating, right? I mean, there's all the things that that you didn't have access to, that you couldn't see, right? There was mystery. Well, the mystery was uncovered. I'm now seeing all these things that I had never seen before in the flesh, even the flesh color, glossy flesh color on the magazine pages was just, you know, completely enticing. And I was all in, right? And I didn't know what all in meant, except for this was really attractive, and I made a mental note. I didn't throw it away. I just put it back in the box, and I made a mental note that, hey, I'm going to remember where this is. Shove that box back in there, and so that was my initial exposure to pornography. And there would be more pornography. There would be more exposures throughout my early teen years, those preteen years, then the teen years, and so forth. And obviously along the way, the technology is getting better, so it's no longer just magazines. It's VHS tapes, if you can remember back that long ago, for those who are listening. But so the technology developed, but the long story is that um, it just continued to be this thing that emerged in my life. And after a while, as you grow older, right, is that there's a certain sort of hook, if you will, that it has on you, or a uh, uh, certain sort of part of you that it sort of taps into. And that became the case for me. I just always sort of had it. There's curiosity. There's You're curious, and you want to know. And just as an adolescent, right, you're growing into sexuality and becoming as a young adult. And so pornography is right there to sort of inform you, and to sort of give you the education that perhaps you aren't getting. Because here's the thing, for me, I never got like the talk. And so I never had any real guidance there. So whatever magazine I found, whatever book I picked up, whatever video, whatever, cable TV would come on, and have provocative things on there. And so I would watch those. And so yeah, that was the early stages. And like I said, it just sort of it's not like you go looking for it, and it's not like you want this necessarily. It just sort of, it grabs you, right? It's not so much that you get hooked on it, as much as it gets hooked on into you. And um and so I would carry this thing. It was a deep dark secret for me. And spiritually, as a young growing young Christian guy, I was really struggling with a sense of shame about this, because I was certain that God didn't want me as a young Christian guy looking at pornography and consuming pornography. And so um I struggle with that spiritually. So I was constantly going to God, saying, God, you got to forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't want to do this, but here it is. Here I am back here again. And that pattern of just sort of, you know, repenting, if you will, and turning away from it, but then only sort of cycle back around and find yourself, stumbling into it again. And by this time, as a young adult, as an adult, I'm making the decision myself now. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm curious and I found this. I am actively looking at it, because it's enticing, and it's gratifying, if you will. And it's in some ways, it's just something that'll draw you in. And there's the pleasure of it, if you will. So that's the cycle I'm just kind of caught up in, and I'm just hiding. It's a deep dark secret nobody else knows. I'm a leader, and on track to become a pastor, because that's what I felt God calling me to do. And this was the deep dark secret that I carried with me for many, many, many years. And it all began with that initial exposure. And I can tell you right now that for the, in today's world, all the studies suggest that the average age for first time exposure to pornography is around the age of 11. And of course, I was 9, and I tend to think that it tends to be on the younger side of that. So my guess is it's probably somewhere down there around the age of 6, 7, or 8, just because of the access that we have to the internet now, and how we're constantly online, and how kids can accidentally stumble across whatever, even if they're just on their own personal iPad or phone or something like that. So, um, but that was kind of how it all started with me, and I just carried it into my adult life and found myself as an adult, as a full-time pastor, um, drifting back into the habit of looking at pornography. And it's a stress reliever. It was an escape from issues, from challenges. I'm married at this time. I was married right out of college, and I brought this issue into my marriage. And my wife had no clue. Of course, that wasn't something that I shared with her during our dating years. I was just hoping and praying that it would not be an issue, that it would go away. And that was kind of a foolish myth that I believed, is that it would just go away, especially once you get married. And in my context, and the way I looked at sex and sexuality, is like, hey, I'm married, I can have sex with my wife, and it's appropriate for, because we're married. And then all of a sudden, you realize, no, you're drifting, you're going back to the pornography. So I always like to say that there's a bigger problem going on than just sex, right? It's not so much the sex. I think there's something bigger, and it's a soul problem. I always say it's not a sex problem, it's a soul problem. It's the unseen part of our lives where things are broken and in disarray. And all pornography is it's kind of a salve for wounds. It's medication, right? Especially in the world in which we live today, you can find all kinds of medicines for whatever ails you. And what I mean by that, soul medicines. Not so much, and obviously we have medications for physical ailments too, but for what's going on underneath the surface, we have a lot of things to sort of anesthetize our lives. And so pornography is a major one today. We know that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry globally. We know that even during our recent pandemic, that people um, that pornography consumption increased because people were at home, and people were there was a lot of just mental distress and isolation. And that is the perfect storm for porn consumption. And truth is, that was the pattern that I kind of fell into as well. So as a pastor, you can spend a lot of time alone, right? And it can be a very isolating uh, job. And so ministry can just be that way. And so I would find myself just alone and with a computer, and needing a break, needing to escape, needing to not think about church members and their problems, right? And all the life things that a pastor is dealing with, the same life things that a lot of people are dealing with. And I chose to pursue pornography kind of as that pleasurable escape, and and probably deeper than that, just to sort of medicate my own sort of personal brokenness and woundedness. And that's something I would discover later on. So what really drives it, and what keeps us coming back, or what keeps a person coming back, what kept me going back to it, was really, there was some personal brokenness that I had to walk through and find healing, and not need. And when you heal, then you don't need to try and salve that wound, or try to put something on that wound. So I had to pursue a journey of healing. And so by God's grace and thankfully, everyone hits their bottom. And I say by God's grace, and I'm thankful for it, that I did. I kind of came to the end of my rope, and I hit that place of bottom. And um, thankfully too, prior to kind of that bottom that I hit, my wife discovered that I had been looking at pornography, and that was the thing I did not want to have happen. I just think I love my wife, and I think so highly of her, and I respect her, and just I never wanted to break her heart, and it is heartbreaking. Without a doubt, it's heartbreaking. By this time, we also have kids, so I have three daughters, and by this time, we have two and a third one on the way by the time I kind of begin to break free. But we have kids, so I'm a father, and my wife discovered me, and her heart was broken, obviously, but she was determined to stay with me and to see me get better, which was a gift. Now that doesn't mean that her frustrations and her hurt and her pain weren't real and weren't um, even intensifying, because it took me a while. I was able to confess in that moment when she found me, and I was sorry in that moment, but I wasn't sorry enough to do the hard work to really get free. And so we struggled through a number of months before I really got on the path towards legitimate recovery and transformation and change. And that is the gift that God gave us, is just the kind of the timing of it all. That when my wife was kind of at the end of her rope and had left me and had planned to leave our relationship, God spoke to both of us, and but more deeply to me, and said, it's time to move to move away from this. This has been the story of your life for so many years, and so God's word to me was, the way to find freedom is through sharing and talking about the issue, which seems really, really, not ideal, if you, especially for a pastor, to start talking about their problem with pornography, right? So that was a message that I got from God at my lowest point. God's big idea was, hey, Bernie, you should disclose your pornography problem. To which I'm just kind of going, really, God, come on now. And but God is God, and there's a reason that God knows everything and has great wisdom. And so that's, I was at a point where I would do anything, and so I called up a friend and invited that friend to my house so that I could confess and just open up and disclose and begin to share my life a bit with another human being. No one else on the face of the planet outside of my wife knew, that as a pastor, a full-time ordained pastor, I was struggling with pornography. And there it was. I just confessed it to the second person on the face of the planet that now knew. And again, I received such grace and patience and wisdom from people. And this person embraced me. And this was a friend that embraced me and prayed for me and gave me some guidance. And that was the beginning of my journey of breaking free. And that from that point on, I pursued all kinds of recovery efforts and groups and conferences and intense weekend intensives to recover and to get better. I read every book that I could. My wife and I went into counseling, and I was just on this path, and that's been the journey ever since. It's just been to pursue uh, sustained recovery, sustained sobriety, because it's one thing to get sober, it's another thing to stay sober. And so, by God's grace, I'm thankful to this day that I've remained, sober and continue to do the work to stay sober. And my wife and I, our marriage has recovered. That's probably the biggest thing that you learn, is that it's not just your own personal recovery, but it's the recovery of the people around you, and the recovery of the relationship. Because the biggest thing that happens with the relationship, if you're married, or if you have a significant partner or significant other, you break a trust, and all we have is the integrity of that trust, right? That's what the relationship is made of. And if when that's broken, and a spouse feels that sense of betrayal and loss, that takes so much time to restore. And again, over the last 15, 16, 17, I can't even remember how many years it's been, but it's taken it's taken a while to kind of get back to where we are now. And um, the thing that my sort of my drug of choice was internet pornography, and that's about as far as it went. It was I just consumed lots of internet pornography, and there were probably moments along the way where I was tempted to act out in other ways, but I never really pursued that. It was just an escalation in consumption. It wasn't even an escalation in explicitity, I would say. I didn't look for anything more explicit or more, just uglier, nastier stuff. It was just kind of this, uh, just this stuff, this whatever you could consume online that was just kind of your um, the pornography that's easily accessible and free. I never even paid for it, right? Just the free stuff, and it was just uh, it just escalated in so much frequency. It kind of controlled my life. So yeah, that's really kind of the story. And I think the for the sake of our topic here, as a father, the one of the most powerful things that I did in my recovery initially, just starting out, was I had to make this list of motivating factors. What's motivating me towards getting free and staying free? And the number one motivating factor, probably second to wanting to be a great husband to my wife and restoring the trust that I lost from my wife, from that relationship, was to be the best father to my children, and not to be a father that my children would grow up and have to be ashamed of, or have to um, have to explain to people what's up with your dad. And then connected to that too was, hey, I don't want my children to ever walk in on me or find something on my computer, or discover something with pornography on it because their dad had on it. So yeah, Jonathan, that's kind of the story. I hope I covered it well
That
for
is
you.
a powerful testimony, just as much a testimony of deliverance, of God's grace, not only manifested through God, but in your family as well. I think it's a very powerful testimony of what God can do. But that kind of gets me to the other side of this. So we're seeing this physical struggle and this physical battle that's going on, that's manifesting itself on the physical side. But there's this other side too, which is the spiritual side, and I'm curious to what's going on there, because there has to be something pretty dark happening there. So, what exactly is the role of pornography in the dark side playbook and Satan's playbook? And how is it being used against God and his people?
Yeah, great question. Love that. No question about it that it's a deeply spiritual issue that's going on with us. And so I'll kind of take you back to the way I like to talk about it. I believe that in the Garden of Eden, that creation that God created Adam and Eve, He created them for intimacy and for connection. That great line where Adam says, "She is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," and the two, become one, and that's God's ideal. And the power of pornography is that it undermines intimacy. It destroys intimacy. The big lie that the culture believes, and people want to believe, is that pornography somehow enhances intimacy and connection. But that's the spiritual lie. That's the lie straight out of hell, if you will. Is that it's akin to the lie that Satan told Eve, that she would not surely die. But in fact, if you consume pornography, your relationships will indeed die. They cannot sustain what pornography brings into a relationship. And so that really is the big play out of the dark side playbook, if you will, is the deception that somehow you can bring pornography into your relationship, and your relationship will get better, when in fact it will disintegrate. Because the nature of pornography is such that it does not allow you to remain whole. It has it breaks you apart. It has it does a fragmentation of you. So, in my story, my wife would, when we were together, not even intimately, but when we were just together in the, around in the living room in the house, she would say that I was there, but I wasn't really there, because there's a preoccupation going on with you when you're hooked on and consuming pornography. And I've talked to tons and tons and tons of people, primarily spouses, right? Women who are married to someone who's consuming a lot of pornography, or a husband, a guy who's married to someone who's consuming a lot of pornography. And the number one thing they'll say is that they're not really here, that they're not present. And so if you're trying to raise children with someone like this, if you're trying to be this family that's together, you're being undermined by pornography. That's the enemy's big play. He doesn't have to get you to do some awful, terrible thing out there. It's just as if pornography isn't awful and terrible enough. But he's just got to get you preoccupied with something else, to where your attention isn't on that which is most important, and that is building and developing and growing these relationships with the people who we love the most. And so I always say pornography is an enemy of intimacy, and it destroys intimacy, and it breaks relationships apart. And the consumer of pornography, in fact, becomes less present, because there's less integrity there. They're not whole themselves. And so they don't have a whole lot to bring to a relationship. And so that really makes it difficult to grow a marriage. That really makes it difficult to enjoy and engage your children, and for people to get you. They can't get you because you're not really, whole, and you're not really there. So yeah, that really is the diabolic nature of pornography, if you ask me, John.
This has been an absolutely powerful, powerful discussion. For the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and continue this discussion in the next episode.